The other big issue is the accreditation cost. For a non-member's $22,000 minimum fee, you can buy a lot of solar panels. You know, you can buy a big rainwater collection system, you know, for that kind of money. And this is a very real thing. Do you go for an accreditation, or do you beef up some of your green stuff in a building if you're thinking about green? So that's a huge barrier. Then, of course, the costs of consultants' fees to manage the submissions is huge, relatively. And then also, then there's whatever costs in the technology up front, because life cycle costing is definitely not part of the culture of developers in suburban and regional areas. So just on this issue, those costs alone can prevent the diffusion of Green Star in the suburbs and regions. The other issue is professional experience, and we're speaking from experience. Trying to get experience in Green Star projects and green building projects, if you're small suburban consultants or small regional consultants, is very, very difficult. And it's very hard for people like us to break into the inner circles of, you know, I call it sort of, it's almost like sort of a club around Green Star. Very hard to break in, which means that people aren't getting experience and knowledge. You know, someone that was a junior working on Green Star 5 years ago might have now, you know, a lot of experience in Green Star projects, and others are not getting the leg in to get that experience. So, you know, and one of the other problems that you get is that there's a lot of regional developers do not like dealing with big multinational consultants. They just fear that they'll be running the project and not them. So, you know, so as you go down in scale, the team needs to go down in scale, but then you've got the problem as who's got the experience. And if there's no experience and no backup, often what can happen, even in a greenish sort of project, is that the team snaps back to a business as usual approach, and so all the green features start disappearing, and even sort of the insulation gets cut back to just near compliance levels with Section J. And the other thing is the Green Star accredited professional role. When we're dealing in suburban and regional areas, a large part of the role is coaching. It's not actually doing the submissions and the paperwork, it's actually educating people, because they don't get it the first time or the second time or the third time or the fourth time or the fifth time, and so on. You're constantly telling the story as to why we're doing this, why it's important. Don't bring that kind of design in because it's not going to achieve those requirements. Haven't you read the manual? All that kind of stuff. That's what you end up doing. And there's no cost component for that kind of coaching. So the fee structures can't sustain that, which makes it even harder with less experienced people to be able to sort of bring the green principles into play. So there may be some solutions, and I'm going to throw a few things out there. Promote the use, this is a bit self-serving, but I'm speaking from experience, and it is a bit polemical, so what the heck. So promoting local Green Star accredited professionals on local projects. And as I say, just because there's now plenty of knowledge and experience in the CBDs doesn't mean the smaller local consultant needs to be frozen out. Or if a large CBD ESD consultant gets involved, maybe consider granting extra Green Star credits for having a local consultant, particularly if it's an as-built where there might be a bit of legwork on sites involved. I think the GBCA should consider a bit more outreach to the suburbs and regions, particularly with councils and local developer associations and architect networks. I think there's a yawning gap in knowledge and understanding out there that needs to be filled. Maybe lobbying LGAs to start putting in Green Star requirements into their development control plans, which has worked in the CBDs, maybe out in the regions and the suburbs that might be good too. I know there are some examples of that in Sydney, but it's not having a big effect because the people who call up Green Star don't understand at all what's involved. And I think because you can get struggling teams on the smaller projects because of the lack of experience, it may be necessary for a Green Building Council to have some formal mechanisms for additional support. And it's important to lower the barriers to entry, and I think consider reducing the registration costs to an area that, to a level that might encourage developers to go Green Star. and also maybe think about a stripped down version of the tools to reduce the bureaucracy and the paper churn for the small projects. I also think there needs to be some kind of Green Star recognition process where there are good green buildings built in the suburbs and regions, but they're just not going to go through the full submission process on Green Star. If there's some sort of lower order way of giving it a tick, that might help the culture change. Maybe that's where sort of an as-built tool, the performance tool, could come into play. Have a stripped-down performance tool that they can build the building and then apply the performance tool to it later. But I think most importantly, the cultural processes have to be embedded in project teams very, very early. And that's fine if everyone around the table's done 10 green buildings. But if you want to go out into the suburbs and regions, that's not going to happen. So there needs to be some way of supporting those teams to change that culture, because there is minimal knowledge about green building principles generally and a lack of motivation. So the final point is cultural change, desperately needed in the suburbs and regions, both in the wider industry but also in the Green Building Council, to widen your thinking beyond your justifiable successes. And that's the end of it, and you can keep talking to us at our pop-up office over there. And any questions from the floor on that? Yeah.
Are you finding that the residents or consumers of the buildings are requesting green building